Rebound, Pucks and Rainbows, Book Number 1. Written by L.A. Witt. Narrated by Michael Ferraiuolo and Nick J. Russo. Chapter 1. Jeff.
They still haven't forgiven you?
My partner, Officer Laura Wayne, shot me a sympathetic look from the passenger seat of our parked police cruiser.
It's been what, 2 months?
Almost 3. I sighed into my travel mug and stared outside at the fading daylight. What can I say? They loved him.
Okay, I get that. I liked him before you told me what a colossal dickhead he is, but you were the one dating him. I mean, they got it when you divorced their mom, right?
Eventually. I put my coffee in the cup holder, but their mom was still going to be a part of their lives. Marcus flat out told me, and them, that if I left him, that was it. He knew damn well how much those kids loved him. Hell, he made sure they loved him. Then he spun it to them that it's my fault he won't be in their lives anymore, and they bought it. Of course. Because it's easier to believe that than to accept Marcus didn't really care about them the way he'd claimed. Laura groaned.
Ugh, can't imagine why you didn't want to stay with him.
I grunted but said nothing. I'd vented to her for a year leading up to the split with Marcus and in the months since. She was the one who'd finally convinced me that if I was that miserable with my boyfriend, I should leave. The longer I stayed with him, the more attached my kids would be when I finally dropped the hammer. As it turned out, they'd already been seriously attached. Marcus and I had been together for almost 6 years. He'd been there for the roller coaster tween and early teen years. He'd picked them up from school and gone to their extracurricular events when I couldn't get away from work. He'd been a godsend during my daughter's transition, and while my son recovered from a broken foot, I would be the first to say the man had been, at least on the surface, a convincingly amazing stepfather. An amazing boyfriend? Not so much. Which was why, 3 months ago, my kids and I had traded Marcus's big 4-bedroom house in a swanky Bellevue neighborhood for a cramped apartment in Lake City, which was a less-than-great part of northeast Seattle. Marcus had been true to his word. I left, and he cut off contact with the kids. They'd barely spoken to me since.
I know it's rough,
Laura said.
But give them time.
She studied me.
How are you doing post-Marcus?
I exhaled, letting my head fall back against the seat. It's a big relief. So of course that makes me feel even guiltier about Claire and David being this miserable.
That should just make you more pissed at Marcus. He totally played them against you and you know it.
Yeah, I know it, but they don't.
How much do they know?
I stared out the windshield, silently begging someone to speed so I can pull them over and get away from this conversation.
Jeff.
Laura's tone was soft. She didn't use her cop voice with me unless I was being seriously stupid.
They'll probably understand if you tell them the whole story.
I turned to her. How do I tell my kids that everything he was doing for them, all the things he bought for them, was a means of manipulating me? He paid for David's out-of-state band trips, and there's no way in hell Valerie and I would have been able to pay for Claire's transition without the money he gave us. And that's just the financial shit. How do I tell my kids my boyfriend showered us all with love purely as a means of controlling me? I shook my head. Sometimes I think I'd honestly rather have them angry at me than feeling guilty over being the main reason Marcus was able to mistreat me for so long. Laura frowned.
Okay, I can see that. So maybe don't tell them the whole story? Tip your hand enough that they know you didn't just leave for kicks. They're at an age where they're going to be dating. They need their dad to be a role model for leaving toxic relationships.
I know, and I've tried. Claire's decided I'm too proud to be with someone who makes more than me, and David doesn't get how it's, quote, better for all of us to be miserable all the time than it was for me to try to make it work with Marcus, end quote. I rubbed my stiffening neck. It's easier for them to believe that I'm a dick than to accept that Marcus stopped loving them. Sighing, I pressed my head back against the seat. Or that he never actually loved any of us.
Reasoning with heartbroken teenagers. Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know, right? But Valerie took them to a family therapist when she got remarried, and she's going to get me in touch with her. Maybe a little professional help will get us somewhere.
It's worth a try. Good luck.
Thanks.
So what about you?
I turned to her. What about me?
You thought about putting yourself out there again?
She held up her phone and grinned.
Maybe download Tinder?
Chuckling, I shook my head. I don't know. I mean, I could definitely stand to get laid.
We could all stand for you to get laid.
I shot her a pointed look. She shrugged without an ounce of contrition.
What? Don't act like it's not true.
I opened my mouth to remind her that I wasn't the only one in this car who was less than bearable when I wasn't having sex once in a while, but right then the radio came to life. All units, 242 at 4th Avenue and Wall Street. Laura and I exchanged glances. A fight? Lovely.
That location's only about 2 minutes from here, she said.
Let's go. I put the car in drive, and she got on the radio to advise the dispatcher that we were responding. Though Seattle traffic was always snarled to hell, I knew some alternate routes and back roads to get us there faster without running lights and sirens. In minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a bar and grill type restaurant a couple of blocks from the Space Needle. Dispatch confirmed that a second unit was on its way but was still several minutes out. The apparent disturbance consisted of 2 Caucasian males in their mid-20s with what looked like a couple of restaurant employees trying to run interference. Both men were brick shithouses, too. Not balloon animal bodybuilders, but they had that hard, compact build that meant if they went to blows, the situation could get ugly real fast. A small crowd had gathered, and several were filming with their phones. Beside them, a very expensive yellow sports car had a smashed windshield and an impressive dent in the fender. There didn't appear to be any weapons in play.
Well, this should be fun,
Laura muttered. Always is. We got out of the car and cautiously approached the scene. Almost everyone at least glanced our way, including one of the 2 men involved in the altercation. The other kept right on screaming at him while the employees warily tried to stay in between them. He gestured wildly as he spoke, but didn't seem to be armed or intoxicated, just really pissed off.
Hey,
Laura said in her cop voice.
Enough.
She stepped into the fray with me right on her heels.
Sir, I need you to step back and be quiet.
The man was instantly silent, mouth still open. His arm stayed upraised, frozen in mid-gesture, and he stared at her, as if stunned by the blonde, ponytailed woman a head shorter than him who'd walked up into his space and told him to shut up. Laura had that effect on a lot of people. She was the opposite of intimidating, which made her that much more intimidating when she fearlessly threw her authority around. I loved my partner.
You,
she said to the other man.
Go over there.
She pointed at a bench beside the restaurant's tinted glass doors about 15 feet away.
Sit down, don't talk, don't move.
The second man blinked, but he didn't protest. He shuffled away and did as he was told. As he walked past me, and I got a good look at his angular, freckled face, I had a flicker of recognition, but I couldn't place him. A repeat offender, maybe? There was something familiar about him, anyway. To the first man, Laura said,
And you go stand over there.
She nodded sharply in the opposite direction. He started to speak, but she put up her hand.
Go stand over there. I'll be with you in a minute.
Once the men were where she'd ordered, I turned to the flustered restaurant manager. I'm going to need statements from you and your employees after we speak to these 2. The manager nodded, glaring at the man who'd been screaming when we'd arrived.
That one. Better not leave before he pays for my broken dishes.
Broken dishes? I asked.
Yeah, through a conniption while they were having a dinner. That's why I kicked them out. Then they just took it out here in the parking lot and I kept at it.
Laura scowled.
We'll need all that information in your statement.
The manager nodded again, and he eyed the 2 men warily before he and his employees went back inside. The onlookers gave us more room, but 3 were still filming because, of course, they were. Which one do you want? I asked Laura, keeping an eye on the more volatile of the two men. She had her attention fixed on the other.
That one looks pretty rattled. He might need a light touch.
Her eyes flicked toward me.
Why don't you talk to him while I take the screamer?
I snorted. You just like dealing with hotheads?
Yeah.
She shrugged unrepentantly.
And you're good with the emotional ones. That's why we rock as partners.
I suppressed a laugh, mostly because no one, least of all the cameras, needed to see a cop snickering at the scene of a very public altercation. All right, go get him. I started toward mine, but hesitated.
But hang on.
She stopped.
I
glanced back and forth between them. Laura and I weren't exactly slouches, but neither of us were built like these two. She was all of 5'6", and though she was strong as hell, not to mention fast, there was this thing called physics. The two men we needed to question were big. The hothead was a solid 6'2" or 3" and seriously broad. The other was around my height, so maybe 5'10" or 11", and made of pure muscle. If either of them, or especially both of them, decided to get cute, Laura and I had weapons at our disposal. But again, physics. Put them alongside us in the ring, and I was pretty sure the two walls of muscle would have an advantage over a petite officer and her middle-aged partner with the fucked-up ankle and a couple of shoulder surgeries under his belt.
What's wrong?
Laura asked. I glanced at them again and looked at her. I think we should wait for backup. She cocked her head.
I don't know. They're pretty subdued right now.
Well, for the moment, yeah. But you saw them when we showed up, and there's... I nodded toward the car. She grimaced, but shrugged.
We'll be all right as long as our backup is here by the time we make any arrests.
Yeah, because if we end up needing to arrest both of them, I'd just as soon not put them in the back of the same cruiser.
Of course not. Okay, so get a status on our backup.
She gestured at the hothead.
I still think we're safe to talk to these two. Just make sure they keep their backs to each other.
I nodded. I radioed to check on our backup, which was apparently still slogging through traffic since this wasn't a lights and sirens emergency. While we waited for the additional patrols to arrive, Laura and I went to our respective parties. Once mine was standing with his back to the other, and I could see Laura in case anything went south, I pulled out my pen and pad. I scrutinized his posture and appearance. It didn't seem like the altercation had gotten physical, and he didn't appear to be injured. Nervous, yes. He shifted his weight and kept his gaze down, and a few times I thought he was on the verge of throwing up. There really was something familiar about him, too. About his reddish-brown hair and the freckles sprinkled across his nose that had obviously been broken at least once or twice in the past. I was sure I'd seen those crystal blue eyes before. Maybe he was a repeat offender, but I had the distinct feeling of looking at someone I'd ogled in the past. And that wasn't something I was prone to doing on the job. Maybe we went to the same gym. Well, whatever. That wasn't what I was here for. I cleared my throat. I'm Officer Logan. I just need to get a statement from you, so let's start with your name. He folded his tattooed arms loosely across his broad chest and didn't look at me.
Asher Crow.
Asher? I blinked. He scowled, still avoiding my gaze.
Yeah, that Asher Crow.
That Asher Crow, the up-and-coming hockey star everyone said would be the next Gretzky or Crosby. No wonder he'd looked familiar. Holy shit. Yeah, this was definitely someone I'd ogled in the past, despite him being half my age and miles out of my league, and I sure as hell wasn't going to ogle him now, because this was so not the time or place. I wrote down his name, as if I would forget. Shame my kids weren't talking to me. They'd lose their minds if they knew I'd met one of the greatest active hockey players in the country, circumstances notwithstanding. Can you tell me what happened tonight? Asher tightened his arms.
He
swallowed hard. Then he took a deep breath, unfolded his arms, and slid his hands into his pockets.
Nathan,
he motioned over his shoulder at the other man.
Well, he's my boyfriend.
Is or was? He pursed his lips but didn't answer. What happened? I asked. He shifted, tension rolling off him in waves.
Everyone said the best way to break up with someone was in public, so they wouldn't make a scene.
Laughing bitterly, he cut his eyes toward the restaurant doorway.
I should have known he'd make one anyway.
His voice shook a little, and there was a faint glimmer of tears in his blue eyes.
I tried to let him down easy, not make it a big thing, but he lost his shit, and he...
Asher straightened, looking around with alarm in his expression.
Oh, God, I need to talk to the manager. Nathan broke a bunch of stuff, and...
One thing at a time. I kept my tone as smooth and gentle as I could. Let me get your statement, and I can help you sort out logistics with the manager. Asher blew out a breath.
I just feel so bad. We probably ruined everyone else's dinner, and He turned to me. Is the manager going to press charges? Well, I'll pay for everything, and extra if I need to. Just,
hey, take it easy. I made a calm down gesture. No charges are getting pressed until my partner and I have talked to everyone and have the whole story. I glanced at the damaged car. Pointing at it with my pen, I said, You want to tell me what happened here? Asher looked over his shoulder and he cringed.
Fuck, just what I need.
What happened to the car? I prodded. He faced me again.
Nathan lost his temper. Enough said.
The mix of hurt and bitterness in his shaky voice told more of the story than even he probably realized, and my heart sank. How bad were things between them, and how long had this been going on? I schooled my expression. So, he's volatile when he's angry?
Volatile?
Asher laughed humorlessly. He folded his arms again and started pacing in front of the restaurant's door.
A drunk hockey player who just lost in the cup finals is volatile. Him?
He jerked his head toward his hopefully ex-boyfriend.
I don't even know what word you'd use. Like I said, there's a reason I did this out in public, and I probably would have even if I'd known he'd do all of this.
A sick feeling curdled in my stomach. Why's that? Asher looked me right in the eye.
Because it would have been 10 times worse at home.
I held his gaze. Then I looked past him at his ex and my partner. Nathan was leaning against a car, shoulders slumped as he gestured like it took all the energy he had left. Laura watched him in between jotting notes on her pad, her expression neutral. To Asher, I said, Do you and Nathan live together? He straightened, eyes widening.
Oh, fuck yeah. We do.
If he isn't arrested, do you have someplace safe to go tonight? Asher swallowed.
Arrested? Do you... Will he?
Maybe. At this point, that's really up to you. He fucking blanched. Did he touch you tonight? I asked softly. During the altercation?
Not...
Asher gulped.
Not here. Not out in public.
I thought this started here. I pointed at the restaurant with my pen. He sighed with frustration, as if he wasn't sure how to articulate himself, or if he wasn't sure he should articulate himself.
We had a fight earlier today, before I went to practice.
He shifted nervously.
That was what made me decide to do this tonight and get it over with.
And during that fight, did he touch you? Avoiding my gaze, he nodded.
It wasn't bad. I mean, he grabbed my arm at one point, shoved me.
He shrugged tightly.
He's done worse.
Of course he had. Abusers were so fucking predictable. Asher stared at the ground between us.
I don't want to press charges.
I bit back a frustrated sigh. I had responded to enough domestics in my 5 years as a cop that I wasn't at all surprised.
Look, if you don't feel safe, I can get a hotel or something.
He chewed his lip.
But I mean, I can't just kick him out.
Is his name on the lease?
Lease?
He eyed me.
No, I own the place. It's in my name.
Of course he owned it. This was Asher Crow, not some software engineer struggling to make rent in this astronomically expensive city. Okay, then yes, you can kick him out. And it sounds like you should. I'd recommend a protective order if there's a pattern of violence. I raised my eyebrows for confirmation. He dropped his gaze, which was all the confirmation I needed. I went on. Until you've had a chance to change the locks and make any necessary changes to your home security, it's up to you if you want to stay in the home or go someplace safe for a night or so. Asher shifted nervously, gaze still down.
I think I'd rather just go home.
I got it, oddly enough. Familiarity felt safe even when it wasn't. Are you concerned for your safety?
I don't want him to think I'm afraid of him.
We both know you are, and there's no shame in it. It's your call, I said softly. He nodded. God, here was this man who dominated his sport and was notorious for his aggression on the ice, and he looked like a scared, confused kid. I could be a cop until the end of time, and it would never cease to blow my mind how easily someone this strong and larger than life could turn so raw and vulnerable at the hands of someone who was supposed to love him. What did he do to you? Asher glanced at the car again, and he deflated even more.
Fuck. How am I going to get home?
I flicked my gaze toward his car. The damage was repairable, but it wouldn't be fixed tonight. Well, if you need it, I'm sure my partner and I could give you a lift. He looked at me, and for the first time there was some actual life in his eyes. Really? Sure. We're not doing our jobs if we don't get you home safely.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The faintest ghost of a smile pulled at his lips.
Thanks.
Don't mention it. I gestured at the bench Laura had sent him to earlier. Why don't you sit tight for a few minutes while I check in with my partner? Asher nodded. While he sat down, I crossed the stretch of sidewalk to where Laura still talked to Nathan. She saw me coming, excused herself from the conversation, and met me halfway. We quickly got each other up to speed. Nathan's statement more or less matched Asher's, though he'd insisted that Asher had given as good as he'd gotten. We'd run that by some witnesses to be sure, but both our guts said Asher was telling the truth. He doesn't want to press charges, I said, and he'd rather go home tonight.
Do you think that's safe?
I glanced at Nathan, who was still leaning against the car and was now thumbing through something on his phone. It's hard to say. I told Asher we'd give him a lift home, though, since I tilted my head toward the battered Ferrari. Laura nodded.
Good call. Is he going to file a protective order?
Don't know yet. I'm not sure he's thinking quite that far ahead yet. She frowned, watching him for a moment. Speaking so quietly no one could hear her but me, she said,
Put him through the ringer, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. An approaching engine and the crunch of tires on gravel turned my head, and I looked as another patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Our backup, Officers Erickson and Beale, stepped out. We briefed them on the situation, and they agreed to take it from here with Nathan while Laura and I focused on Asher. Fine by me. After everything Asher had said, and not said, I wanted to throttle his son of a bitch ex. As it often was, the aftermath of an altercation like this was pretty straightforward. Witness statements, damage reports, phone numbers exchanged in the name of insurance claims and follow-ups, signatures on paperwork, warnings about more bullshit, a tow truck en route to take Asher's Ferrari to the dealership, a few more warnings for good measure in case Nathan decided to get cute. It was frustrating to be unable to arrest Nathan. We nearly had the opportunity to do so at one point over the damage done to the restaurant, but the owner had backed down on pressing charges after Asher had offered to pay more than twice the actual damages. As long as Nathan didn't show his face here again, the manager would let it go, so we couldn't make an arrest. For good measure, Asher had pleaded with us not to take Nathan into custody. I didn't have to ask why. I'd been to enough domestics, in particular those that came on the heels of the abuser being arrested for a previous domestic, to understand where he was coming from. The best I could do was inform Nathan that further contact with Asher would be construed as harassment and even stalking, and that this would be his one and only verbal warning. That seemed to get the point across. When all was said and done, Nathan's sister came and got him, and before he left, he reiterated his pledge to stay away from Asher and the house until further notice. Once the asshole was gone, Asher climbed into the passenger seat of our cruiser, while Laura took the back. We didn't want him feeling like he was being arrested, and anyway, she didn't need as much legroom as he did, so she didn't object. "So, where are we headed?" I asked as I pulled out of the parking lot.
"Mercer Island?"
Well, that wasn't a shock. With what he undoubtedly made as a top professional athlete, of course he lived in one of the richest cities in the area. On the way, Asher didn't say a word, except to give me the occasional direction. He stared out the window, his gaze distant. It didn't strike me as a celebrity being aloof in the presence of lesser mortals. From the moment I'd started getting his statement, I'd had the impression he was barely holding himself upright. I couldn't really blame him for being up in his own head now. Half an hour after we'd left the restaurant, I pulled down a winding driveway that led through some trees and to a circular courtyard in front of an enormous house. It was typical Mercer Island opulence, at least 3 stories, huge picture windows, and a 5-car garage. From what I could see of the high-ceilinged entryway, there was a colorful blue and yellow glass chandelier. I would have bet money it had been made by Chihuly himself. I couldn't see much beyond the house, but I was pretty sure we were at the very edge of the island's west coast, which meant he undoubtedly had a spectacular panoramic view of Mount Rainier, Lake Washington, and Mount Baker. This was definitely not a place a man could buy on a cop's salary, supplemented by a military retirement. Asher cleared his throat and unbuckled his seatbelt.
"Thanks for the ride, and, everything."
"Don't mention it." I pulled a card from the console and held it out. "Mercer Island is out of my jurisdiction, but if you need anything, call me. If he shows up or you just need some backup while he's moving out, say the word." Asher looked at the card, then at me. After a moment, he took it, and with unsteady hands, he tucked it into his wallet.
"Thanks, I might take you up on that." He looked up at the house, apprehension written all over his face. "I think he'll stay away. I hope he will."
I studied him. "Do you want me to check on you after my shift?" He turned to me again, brow furrowed. "Won't be for a few hours yet, but I can give you a call, make sure everything is all right." I seriously thought he'd wave my concern away and insist he'd be fine, but to my surprise he quietly said,
"That might not be a bad idea."
"Okay." I handed him another card and a pen. "Why don't you write down your number?" I had it on the report, but I felt better about him actively giving me his number for the purpose of me calling him later. Asher wrote it down and handed back the card.
"Thanks again. I really appreciate it. That you give a shit, I mean."
I smiled. "Don't mention it." He almost smiled back, almost. Then he got out of the car, and he opened the door to the back seat so Laura could get out. They exchanged a few words I didn't hear. After a moment, he headed for the house, and she climbed into the passenger seat. Once Asher was inside, I started up the driveway again.
"Think his ex will leave him alone?"
Laura didn't sound overly optimistic. I shifted in the driver's seat and kept my attention fixed on the road. God, I hope so. But I'd been a cop too long to believe it would be that easy.
Chapter 2. Asher. The silence of my house was driving me insane. Wandering restlessly through the empty rooms and hallways, I thought about putting on music, but then I might not hear if a car pulled up or if someone tried to break in. Or, I thought with a shudder, if someone put a key in the front door. Damn, I should have taken his house key. Did locksmiths change locks this time of night? Was it too late to swing into the Humane Society and adopt 5 of the biggest, loudest dogs they had? Some of my teammates had dogs, all big ones too, aside from Grady's Pomeranian, but I wasn't even sure something that tiny and fluffy counted as a dog. Then again, she was loud as fuck and had a hell of a bite, so maybe he'd let her come over for a slumber party along with our other teammates' dogs? I shook that thought away as I turned the corner into the kitchen. If there was one thing I wasn't doing tonight, it was pinging my teammates to let them know I was scared shitless of my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, showing up, and I shuddered. I didn't know what bothered me more, the idea of what Nathan might do, or the idea of my teammates finding out. A loud creak from the other room stopped me in my tracks. I froze, listened, heart racing. Silence. After a moment, I released a long breath. Just the house settling. Nathan wasn't here. He was gone. Wasn't he? Fuck! I whispered into the stillness and rubbed my throbbing temples. Maybe that cop was right. Maybe I should have pressed charges. At least then Nathan would be in jail tonight, and I wouldn't have to worry about him showing up. Except he'd be let out tomorrow. And then what? He'd be pissed. I didn't want him pissed. I just wanted him gone. So, tomorrow I'd go downtown and see about that restraining order. Tonight, I just had to hope he took the cops at their word that there'd be hell to pay if he didn't stay away from me. I hoped he wouldn't decide it was worth it. I shuddered. My phone chirped, startling me almost as badly as the house settling. Christ, I was jumpy. At least I knew it wasn't Nathan. I'd assigned every member of the Snowhawks the same generic text tone and given him a different one. The message was from Bruiser, our starter goalie. Hey, Crows, you okay, man? WTF is up with that video? A moment later, one came from Gallagher. Did your BF fuck up your car, dude? Ah, crap. That meant word was getting out. I'd been vaguely aware of people filming us, but it still never ceased to amaze me how fast that shit spread once it landed on the web. I quickly Googled my name, filtering by most recent, and yep, there it was. Nathan and me in the parking lot of the restaurant, getting in each other's faces. On some level, I was actually proud of myself for shouting back. It was part of why I'd chosen to hash things out in a restaurant. He knew I wouldn't raise my voice to him at home, and I knew he wouldn't raise his hand to me in public. I closed the window and responded to Bruiser's text. Just a fight with the BF. All good. To Gallagher, I said, not on purpose. He's paying the deductible, LOL. Gallagher replied first. For a dent like that, he better be blowing you good tonight. Then Bruiser said, "Kay, let us know if we should kick his ass." I wanted to laugh, but if I did, I'd end up crying instead. We were all protective of each other, and they all joked about kicking Nathan's ass if he ever stepped out of line. Just brotherly protectiveness, not any actual malice toward my boyfriend. Truth was, none of them knew the reality of our relationship. That was the thing about being a hockey player. There was no such thing as a bruise that made people ask questions. Any mark my guy saw was just left over from practice or a game. Hockey players weren't psychic, and it wasn't for nothing I had a reputation for being a pit bull on the ice. Bruises happened. I couldn't expect my team to know which marks came from someone on an opposing team and which came from the man I lived with. I didn't want them to know the truth. I didn't want anyone to know it. Against my better judgment, I opened the video again. I pushed the slider forward to the moment when the cops had pulled up. The person filming moved aside, but they kept on recording, pausing on Nathan and the blonde cop for a moment before swinging it to me, then back, and to me again. I zeroed in on the cop who'd been talking to me. I told myself it was just because I didn't want to watch myself looking so twitchy and agitated, but if that were the case, I'd just close the stupid video. I didn't close the stupid video. I brought the phone closer to my face and squinted, trying to see him better. When the camera moved again, I thumbed the slider forward. I don't want to look at Nathan. I want to look at, him. I paused it, and I didn't care if it made me pathetic or a creeper or whatever. I stared at him. Either I was in desperate need of a distraction in the form of some eye candy, or Seattle PD had sent their hottest cop on that call. Maybe a little bit of both. You know those cops who've been on the force for 1,000,000 years and are just grazing on donuts until it's time to retire? The ones who might have been in shape in their younger days, but eventually start leaning toward round as a shape? Officer Logan was not one of those guys. His near black shirt held on to broad shoulders, and though his short sleeves covered his upper arms, his forearms had that kind of definition that takes work to maintain. He was mostly gray, and his haircut and posture both made me think he'd spent time in the military before he'd become a cop. I had an uncle who'd done 30 years in the Army, and he still stood like that and kept his hair cut extra short. Oh, hell. This guy? In a military uniform? Oh, yeah. He rocked the Seattle police blues, and the thought of him in camouflage brought impure thoughts to life in my head. Shame his bulky police belt kept me from seeing how narrow his hips were, but it did frame his ass nicely. God help me if he ever worked security at the arena. One glance at him through the glass, and I'd forget how to skate. He was just so... All at once, the video vanished, and my ex's smiling face appeared on the screen in the same instant his ringtone shrieked out of the speaker. I startled, dropping my phone on the counter, and staggered back a step. As it kept ringing and vibrating on the granite, I stared at it like it was a pissed-off snake. It only took a few seconds to get my equilibrium back. I snatched the phone up and ignored the call. What part of "you're not to have any contact with Mr. Crow" did Nathan not understand? All of it, apparently. Not 30 seconds after I declined his call, his 2-beat text tone sent a shudder through me. Oh, what fresh hell. I glared at the screen. Baby, we need to talk. I wanted to puke. Well, wanted probably wasn't the right word. It was higher on my list than talking to Nathan, though. My hands weren't steady, but with some cursing and a little help from autocorrect, I managed to write, "Not interested." That urge to throw up was even stronger as my thumb hovered over the send button, but I made myself tap the screen anyway. The message sent. My stomach lurched. That restraining order was sounding better and better. How did I do that anyway? And would it help? An old teammate's ex-wife had had one against him, and he'd walked right through it. Didn't seem like they were worth the paper they were printed on, but it was better than... The text tone sounded again, and I swallowed bile. Fuck. He really wasn't going to give up, was he? Look, baby, tonight was just a bump. We can fix this. My thumbs hovered over the tiny keypad. I hated myself for not being able to tell him I didn't want to fix it. That I'd meant it when I gently told him over dinner that I wanted him to move out. I hated that I couldn't tell him there was a restraining order in his future, and he better find himself a place because I wanted him and his shit out of my house ASAP. I fucking hated that I couldn't say or even type the words. But I'd come as far as I could tonight. Dropping the hammer over dinner, digging in my heels in the parking lot, standing my ground until the cops came. That was it. That was all I had. Before I could think of something to say, another message came through. Do you want me to come over? And with that, the vomit I'd been holding back lurched into my throat. God, I couldn't handle him tonight. I couldn't deal with him on the phone, and I sure as shit couldn't face him in person. Calling on reserves I didn't know I had, I punched the keypad 3 times. N.O. Send. Then I shut off my phone and shoved it down the counter. It went off the end and clattered onto the marble floor. I picked it up, gave the screen a cursory glance to make sure the case, which was supposed to withstand even a hockey player's delicate touch, had protected it. It had. I tossed the phone onto the counter, then went looking for a distraction that would actually pull my attention away from Nathan. Eventually, I grabbed my laptop, poured a triple bourbon, dropped onto the sofa, and threw myself into watching videos of the Stingers like Coach wanted me to. They'd won the cup last year, edging us out of the semifinals before dominating the shit out of the Icebergs to clinch their third cup in a row. I needed to watch them, find their weaknesses, and figure out how to exploit them. My concentration was still a wreck, and drinking wouldn't help at all, but watching rival players firing the puck back and forth and into the Icebergs' net gave me something normal to do. Something I understood and could work with. Between the booze and the videos, I was starting to calm down. Right up until a set of high beams arced through the front window. I froze. Oh no. He was here? He was here. Shit. What do I do? I glanced at the counter where I'd left my phone. Call Mercer Island PD? Face him myself? Pretend I wasn't here? Except, that didn't sound like Nathan's car. Then again, his car was still in the garage. I'd driven us to dinner, and his sister had picked him up. Maybe an Uber? A car door slammed outside. My heart slammed into my ribs. Holding my breath, I craned my neck to look out the window. And just like that, all the air rushed out of my lungs so fast my head spun. The figure coming up the walkway wasn't Nathan. It was that cop. Officer Logan. He wasn't in his uniform anymore, but I'd have recognized his face anywhere, especially after the video ogling session my ex had so rudely interrupted. I hurried down the hall to the front door. Officer Logan! Hey! He met my gaze. I tried to call, but your phone went straight to voicemail. He slid his hands into the pockets of his jeans. I got worried. Figured I'd err on the side of caution and make sure you're all right. Oh, shit. I totally forgot you were going to call. I gestured over my shoulder. I turned my phone off. Officer Logan arched an eyebrow. Any particular reason? I chewed my lip and looked away. Logan sighed. He contacted you, didn't he? Are you surprised? Are you? Not really. I glanced around the courtyard in front of the garage and was suddenly aware of all the shadowy areas in the woods that my floodlights didn't quite reach. Do you, want to come inside? Logan watched me for a second, then shrugged. Sure. I stood aside to let him through, and closing the door behind us managed to simultaneously soothe my nerves and ratchet them up. There was no telling where my ex was right now, just that he wasn't here. Officer Logan, though. Officer Logan was in my house. Still hot and built and full of genuine concern, and in my house. Because this day couldn't possibly get any more surreal. You want a cup of coffee? I asked. You don't have to go to any trouble. He smiled, the warmth of his expression sending a very different variety of warmth through me. Like I said, I just came by to check up on you. I appreciate it, and it's no trouble. I started toward the kitchen, motioning for him to follow. I could use some myself, actually. He didn't object, and making coffee gave me something to do. It also gave me a chance to actually look at my guest in the flesh. I'd been so jittery and rattled at the restaurant, I hadn't even thought to. Now that I was calmer, though, whoa. Out of his uniform, he didn't seem quite as imposing. He'd changed into jeans and a gray hoodie that said Marines across the chest, and aside from the visible, and under the circumstances, comforting holster on his hip, he looked like a regular guy now. Still attractive as hell, but without that air of quiet authority he'd had at the restaurant. Or with less of it, anyway. He didn't exactly strip off his uniform and turn into a shrinking violet. He just looked normal. And hot. Couldn't forget hot. Especially since, in the warm light of my kitchen, his hair looked even grayer than it had looked earlier. Why was that sexy? I wondered briefly if it was because my as-of-tonight ex had thick dark hair, and short gray hair was about as different as you could get short of shaving it all off. I didn't let that thought linger. Officer Logan was hot in his own right. I didn't need to keep comparing him to my asshole ex. Though admittedly, he came out looking even better by comparison, so... yeah. Now that Officer Logan was dressed down, he had this easygoing mellowness about him that I hadn't realized I'd been craving in a man. In fact, seeing his Clark Kent side was probably what made my senses tingle now. Between Nathan and pro sports, I'd had enough hypermasculine, intimidating, I'll fight you over whatever bullshit for one lifetime. Give me a man with steady, quiet energy like Officer Logan's any day. Where do I find a guy like this when I'm ready to date again? I poured our coffees and slid one across the counter. Milk? Sugar? He shook his head as he took the cup. No thanks. I got used to it black when I was in the military. They don't let you pollute your coffee? Oh, they do. He shrugged. But when you're in the desert and rations start getting thin, you learn to make do. Yeah, I guess you would. How long were you in? 20 years. I whistled. Wow. So you retired and then became a cop? Had to do something. He chuckled. It was either this or find some desk jockey job, and I did enough of that during my last couple of years in the Corps. Ew. I wrinkled my nose. No thanks. That was my thought. So now I'm a cop. Do you like it? Most of the time, yeah. The hours can be brutal, and some of the calls are... His gaze turned distant, but only for a second before he shook himself and brought his coffee to his lips. It has its ups and downs. I didn't ask him to elaborate. After a moment, he took a deep breath and met my gaze. Listen, there's a reason I came in civvies tonight. I lifted my eyebrows. I mean, I'm out of my jurisdiction anyway, so I can't... In an official... He waved a hand. Bottom line, I was concerned, but I've, He swallowed hard. I've been there. In a way. And I know some people find it intimidating to talk to a cop, so I'm kind of here as a cop, but kind of not. Oh. I had no idea what to say. Really? He nodded. I'm armed because I didn't know if your ex would be here, but otherwise, I'm just here as Jeff. Oh, I said again. Someone actually knew what I'd been through with Nathan and gave enough of a shit to not only show up off the clock to check on me, but this too? Thanks. That's really amazing. He smiled faintly and brought his coffee up again. Like I said, I've been there. Sorry to hear it, I muttered. Likewise. We met each other's gazes. Was it weird to be bonding in a way over the things our past partners had put us through? Maybe. I didn't know. Tonight, I'd take whatever I could get, and somehow this seemed like more, way more, than I'd had any right to expect from anyone. I cleared my throat and thumbed my coffee cup handle. Do you want to come in and sit? Might be more comfortable than standing around in the kitchen. Sure. We went into the living room where I'd been studying hockey videos earlier. I closed the laptop, and we took seats on the wide leather sofa. So, you and Nathan. Jeff settled onto a cushion. How long were you two together? I stared into the coffee cup I was cradling between both hands. 4 years. Just thinking about that made my head hurt. God, I wasted so much time with him. I feel like a fucking idiot. Asher. Jeff put his coffee cup on a coaster, then twisted toward me and rested his elbow on the back of the couch. I'll tell you right now, I go to domestics all the time. Everything you're thinking and doing, it's completely normal. It is? He nodded. I went through a lot of it myself. Stayed with someone a lot longer than I should have and felt stupid after the fact. Some tension melted out of my shoulders. As much as I hated knowing he'd been there, done that, there was some comfort in other people, especially him, knowing what I was feeling right now. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I felt a bit less irrational. Less alone, anyway. Jeff studied me. Having a relationship in the public eye can't have helped anything. I deflated. Oh my God, no, it's been awful. The thing is, I've been out since college. My coaches said I should stay closeted because there was no way an openly gay player was going to get drafted into the PHL. But you came out anyway. I nodded, staring at the coffee table. I figured I'd put it out there. This is who I am. If you want me to play for your team, fucking live with it. Ballsy. And apparently you still made the cut. Yeah. But the thing is, when you're the only openly gay player in the entire league, there's so fucking much pressure. I pressed my elbows into my knees and let my head fall forward as I kneaded my stiff neck. Every time a gay celebrity couple breaks up, or they even give each other a dirty look, it's proof that same-sex relationships are doomed to fail. Jeff laughed dryly. Don't I know it? Not like straight couples ever fall apart, right? Exactly. Exhaling, I leaned back against the couch. And if I'm not the absolute best hockey player on the ice, then it's just proof that gay men don't belong in pro sports. So I can't just be a hockey player who happens to be gay. I have to be the perfect hockey player and the perfect gay man. We had to have the perfect relationship so no one would hold us up as a reason why gay men were... I waved a frustrated hand. It was a lot of pressure. It is a lot of pressure. He was nodding as I spoke. And since you're a high-profile athlete, you're going to have a high-profile breakup. I winced. Yeah. Jerking my thumb over my shoulder toward the kitchen, I sighed. The video of me and Nathan fighting, and you and your partner showing up, it's all over the internet already. Christ, that didn't take long. No, it didn't. I rubbed my hand over my face. So now my teammates are worried. Social media is probably in a feeding frenzy, and Nathan has got to be counting down until I call him to say I want him to come back. Are you going to? I actually had to think about it. Really think about it. That alone made me realize how much my relationship with Nathan had fucked up my brain. Finally, though, I came to my senses and said, no. Jeff didn't speak, but the silence rather loudly asked, You sure about that? I'm not going back. I wasn't sure if I was saying it to Jeff or myself. I'm just nervous about going forward. You think he's going to harass you? I laughed. I know he will. And I'll get the restraining order, but that won't stop him. It won't stop him, Jeff admitted. But it gives us a hell of a lot more leverage to charge him if and when he violates it. Isn't that how abuse victims get killed? Sometimes, unfortunately. Our system is not designed to... He gestured dismissively. We'll be here all night if I start down that road. Has he ever threatened to kill you? Anything like that? I shook my head. No. I'd like to think he won't do something now that I've broken up with him, but I guess we'll see. Jeff nodded, chewing his lip. To be on the safe side, I'd look into changing the locks and updating your security system as soon as possible. That's the plan. I rubbed my forehead. Honestly, I don't think he's dangerous like that. I mean, we'll see, but... I exhaled hard. I just know that one way or another, moving on is going to be miserable. It's one of the reasons I put it off for so long. Understandable, he said softly. Especially since he... I hesitated, not sure how to word it. He definitely got under my skin. In what way? Fucked with my head, mostly. I sipped my coffee, but it tasted more bitter than it should have. Hockey players? We're superstitious as hell. So I've heard. Yeah, well, Nathan didn't just know that. He exploited it. He's been a season ticket holder since I was a rookie. A few rows back from the glass so I could actually see him instead of up in one of the VIP boxes. I loved it back then, and the Snowhawks. We were having a kick-ass season, so he kept saying he was my good luck charm. He'd joke about not showing up to a game just to see if we'd lose. I stared into my coffee cup. Then we got into a huge fight one morning before a home game. When I went out on the ice for warm-ups, he was there. And he was there for the first period. But when we came back out for the second, I shook my head. He was gone. I thought he might have gone to get some food or take a leak, but he didn't come back. And I choked. We lost, and the next home game, he didn't show up at all, and we lost again. Jesus, Jeff said. Yeah. My stomach roiled, and my face burned with shame and embarrassment. I begged him to start coming to games again. He did, and I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered, and we started winning again. So you've been afraid to leave him because he wouldn't come to games anymore? Without looking at him, I nodded. It sounds so stupid, but... I mean, during warm-ups at every game, the first thing I do when I come out onto the ice is look up at his seat to make sure he's there. I swallowed. Is it weird that I'm freaking out about him not being in his seat during warm-ups once the season starts? Jeff shook his head. No. Like you said, he got under your skin. Just because you got rid of him doesn't mean that itch will go away overnight. True. I don't know. It's all so... I mean, between being afraid of how he'd take it if I dumped him and worrying I'd jinx myself and the team, or... Asher. The way he said my name didn't just stop my rambling. I swore it was like he'd put a reassuring hand on my shoulder, and damn it, now I wished he really would. When I turned to him, he looked right in my eyes. It's not stupid. Even leaving a normal, healthy relationship is hard. Walking away from an abuser? He groaned and shook his head. I swear it was easier to quit smoking than it was to leave my ex. Really? Oh yeah. He held my gaze. Listen, my ex never got violent, but he was abusive in his own ways. Let's just say I'm the last person who will tell you it's easy to walk away from that. I tried not to let my surprise show. He? Did Jeff say he? But all I said was, really? He nodded, breaking eye contact and fixing his attention on something across the room. His fingers drummed on his coffee cup. He played head games. A lot of them. Fucker even played my kids against me. He did? Another nod, eyes still focused on something else. I wouldn't say he spoiled them, but life with him was definitely not the same as life under my paycheck or their mom's. I mean, I'm a cop, and I have my military retirement. I'm not exactly... He waved a hand at our surroundings. Loaded. My ex, though, he's got a cushy, high-up position at one of the big software companies, and let's just say they pay him well. At first, I didn't like the idea of him paying for things, but he insisted that if we were partners, we shouldn't make things his and mine. If my kids needed something, for example, they weren't going to do without just because I didn't have the money when he did have it. I grimaced. Why do I feel like I know where this is going? He huffed a quiet, bitter laugh. Yeah, pretty obvious in hindsight. Especially since he saved my ass a few times. Helped cover some expenses that would have left me up shit creek. I just didn't know he was keeping tally in his head until he started calling things in. I swallowed. Calling them in how? Mostly lording the big purchases over me so he could get what he wanted. Make me give in during an argument. He paused, jaw working, and then he softly added, get what he wanted sexually. Whoa, I breathed. Really? Jeff nodded without looking at me. He was manipulative anyway, and when he had leverage, like money, he used it. Hell, I found out later when one of my kids let it slip that he'd basically been promising them the moon once we got married. College tuition, big vacations, cars, weddings when the time came. We'd get married, and then they'd be his kids for real, and I think they were clinging to that idea. That if we made things permanent, they wouldn't have to worry anymore that he might leave. They were worried about that? Scowling, he nodded again. Marcus was good at dropping little hints now and then and making sure they knew he was just Dad's boyfriend. Boyfriends were temporary. Husbands were permanent. Were you planning on marrying him? I thought about it. Didn't tell the kids, though, because I didn't want them getting their hopes up until I was absolutely sure it was what I wanted to do. Then, come to find out, they not only had their hopes up, they'd been promised all kinds of shit once I got off my ass and gave the son of a bitch a ring. He laid the emotional manipulation on thick and drove it home with financial shit, too. Promising them all kinds of things they knew I could never afford without him. You know, just to make absolutely sure they'd be able to tangibly feel his absence if I didn't toe the line. Jeff laughed bitterly, shaking his head. If I walked away from him knowing one thing, it's that I'm never letting another man manipulate my children or lord money over me like that again. Yeah, I can imagine. He released a long breath. I'm sorry. He rolled his shoulders, then rubbed the left one gingerly. I came here to check on you and ended up unloading everything from my own breakup. It's okay. Actually, I hesitated. I mean, I won't say it's good that you went through that, but talking to someone who's been there, it helps. A lot. Jeff met my eyes. Does it? Yeah. I haven't been able to talk to anyone about this before. At all. Well, the door is always open if you need it. I managed to smile. Thanks. Smile fading, I said. The season starts soon, but hopefully I have enough time to get my head out of my ass. Or at least get that asshole out of my head. Jeff nodded. Just, if it isn't enough time, don't be too hard on yourself. Even when the worst is over, remember that he didn't get under your skin overnight. I shuddered. Yeah, I know. And God, speaking of overnight, it's late, and you just got done with your shift. I didn't mean to keep you this long. It's okay. He checked his watch and sighed. I should probably get going, though. I still need to get back to Lake City tonight. Lake? I blinked. Mercer Island could not have been farther out of his way. He'd have to go back across Lake Washington and drive clear up past the north end of Seattle. You live in Lake City, but you came all the way out here? Jeff's smile was tired but genuine. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Wow, thanks. You didn't have to do that, but thank you. Don't mention it. We rose, and as we headed to the door, I realized I kind of wanted to ask him to stay longer. Like, a lot longer. But that was stupid. He hadn't come here to hook up. He was here as a cop, even if he was off the clock, miles out of his jurisdiction, and dressed in plainclothes. The only reason it even crossed my mind was because I was desperate for a distraction, and a hot silver fox with a badge shoving his dick down my throat would definitely qualify. I shivered and tamped down on that thought. Opening the front door, I said, "Thanks again. For everything. Really. You're welcome." He paused. "You still have my card, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, still got it." "Okay. Well, the offer still stands. Call me if you need anything." What if I want something? I cleared my throat. "Will do. Thanks." We held eye contact longer than it seemed like we should have. Then he flashed another quick smile, turned, and headed for his car. I watched him until he'd cleared the last step, and finally made myself close the door. Alone in the entryway, I leaned against the wall, closed my eyes, and released a long breath. What a day. What a night. As Jeff's engine faded into the distance, I pushed myself off the wall. I checked every lock in the house, changed the code on my security system, collected my phone off the counter, I didn't turn it on, and trudged upstairs to the bedroom. I was exhausted, and I needed to sleep so I'd be sharp at practice tomorrow. I'd been sloppy enough today thanks to Nathan. If I didn't have my shit together tomorrow, Coach Morris would have my head. So yeah, sleep. I needed some of that. Like, now. Except I kind of wanted to lie awake for a while and think about the hot cop who'd come by to check on me. It was such a novelty, being free to look at other men, being able to entertain a fantasy, maybe even jerk off to it, without feeling guilty or being afraid Nathan would somehow know. Jeff was the first attractive man I'd laid eyes on in the wake of my split, so of course he was the one I wanted to think about, and I didn't try to fight it. No, I completely surrendered to the idea of spending half the night with that cop on my brain, with or without my hand under my shorts. But even thinking about Jeff and worrying about Nathan couldn't keep me awake. Everything over the past few hours had pretty much knocked my legs out from under me, and not entirely in a bad way, though there was no telling what Nathan would do going forward, how long it would take him to accept that our relationship was over, how he'd respond to the restraining order I'd filed tomorrow. I'd done it. I'd ended us. And I'd stuck to my guns even when he hadn't wanted to take breakup for an answer. Months of apprehension were gone. Countless mental rehearsals had paid off. Dozens of games botched by distraction were behind me. As soon as I hit the pillow, a free man for the first time in 4 years, a profoundly liberating relief took over. And I slept harder than I had in ages.